Imagine this, a close-knit family in Sydney, their lives seemingly ordinary, until one day, the father, Mamdouh Noufl, vanishes. No goodbyes, no explanation, just gone. At first, whispers circulate of a spontaneous trip abroad, but as the days turn into weeks, a haunting question emerges. Where is Mamdouh? Now, picture this. Months later, police uncover a chilling trail of lies, power struggles, and an accusation so shocking it defies belief. Could the answers to Mamdouh's disappearance lie within his own home? And if so, what unimaginable truth waits to be uncovered? This is the story of a disappearance that gripped a city, and a case that will leave you questioning everything. Mamdouh Emad Noufl was a man of quiet determination, deeply rooted in his values and family. Born in Egypt, he moved to Sydney in search of a better life for his loved ones. Over the years, he became a respected member of Greenacre's Egyptian community, a place where he was known for his calm demeanor and a steady, unwavering sense of responsibility. As a father of 8, Mamdouh's life revolved around his family. He worked tirelessly to provide for them, juggling multiple responsibilities while maintaining a sense of duty that left those around him in awe. Friends described him as a man of few words, but with a heart that spoke volumes. He was always the first to help if anyone in the community needed something, said one acquaintance. You could count on him. But beneath the surface, there were complexities in Mamdouh's life that weren't immediately apparent to those on the outside. His relationship with his wife, Nirmeen, had long been a cornerstone of his life. Together, they navigated the trials of raising a large family in a new country. While their marriage had its challenges, those who knew them spoke of their shared commitment to their children and their faith. However, in recent years, Mamdouh's personal life took a surprising turn. In late 2022, he revealed to his wife that he had become engaged to a woman in Egypt. This decision, deeply tied to cultural and personal circumstances, introduced significant strain into the dynamics of his household. Mamdouh was clear about his intention to maintain both relationships, a choice that left his family grappling with a mix of emotions, confusion, betrayal, and tension. Despite this, Mamdouh continued his daily routines. In Sydney, he was known for frequenting local coffee shops, engaging in quiet conversations with fellow community members, and attending events at the mosque. He had an air of dependability, someone you wouldn't expect to be at the center of any drama, let alone tragedy. In May 2023, Mamdouh's life took an unexpected turn. He was last seen at his Greenacre home, reportedly preparing for a trip overseas. The plan was vague, and while those close to him knew of his frequent travels between Australia and Egypt, there was something unusual about this particular trip. He hadn't told anyone when he would return, and communication with his family became sporadic. Weeks passed, and Mamdouh's absence began to raise alarms. Family members in Egypt reached out to his wife and children in Sydney, seeking answers, but no one had heard from him. At first, there was an assumption that he had simply extended his stay abroad, something not uncommon for him. But when he failed to respond to repeated messages and calls, concern grew. By July 2023, those closest to him could no longer ignore the unease settling over them. Mamdouh's children, who had initially hoped their father's silence was temporary, decided to involve the authorities. The missing persons report they filed marked the beginning of a search that would uncover far more than anyone could have anticipated. Mamdouh's life, marked by decades of hard work and dedication, now became the focus of a painstaking investigation. Detectives sought to understand the man behind the disappearance, the devoted father, the husband navigating a complex marriage, and the individual whose choices had left a trail of questions. Friends, neighbors, and acquaintances painted a picture of a man who, despite his challenges, remained steadfast in his duties and relationships. What emerged was a portrait of a man deeply loved but also misunderstood. Mamdouh's decision to engage in a second relationship, while rooted in personal and cultural complexities, had brought tensions into his family that could not be ignored. Yet, no one could have predicted the storm brewing around him or the dark path his story would take. Mamdouh Noufl's disappearance was not just a missing persons case. It was the unraveling of a life filled with layers, contradictions, and unspoken struggles. To those who knew him, he was more than just a headline. He was a father, a husband, a man of faith, and a figure whose quiet presence left an indelible mark on everyone he encountered. In May 2023, Mamdouh Emad Noufl, a 62-year-old father and respected member of the Greenacre community in Sydney, disappeared without a trace. His family initially believed he had traveled to Egypt, a trip he often spoke about. Friends and neighbors assumed the same, picturing him reconnecting with relatives or handling personal business overseas. For weeks, there was no reason to suspect anything unusual. But as the weeks turned into months, the silence became deafening. Mamdouh was known to be in regular contact with his family in Egypt, yet none of them had heard from him. Not a single call, text, or social media update. It was out of character. Concern turned to alarm, and his family and friends began to suspect that something wasn't right. By July, Mamdouh's family contacted the New South Wales police and filed a missing persons report. What began as a routine inquiry soon unraveled into a mystery far more troubling than anyone could have anticipated. In the early stages of the investigation, police treated Mamdouh's disappearance as a standard missing person case. Detectives retraced his last known movements, speaking with neighbors, friends, and family. They searched for records of recent travel, plane tickets, emigration logs, anything that might confirm he had left the country. But to their surprise, no such evidence existed. Mamdouh had not boarded a flight, nor had he crossed any borders. His passport remained unused. When detectives turned their attention to Mamdouh's bank accounts, the mystery deepened. There were no transactions that suggested travel expenses, and his accounts had been dormant since his disappearance. For someone allegedly traveling overseas, this was highly unusual. Even more troubling was the absence of communication. Mamdouh was active on social media and often kept in touch with family and friends. But in the weeks following his disappearance, his social media accounts had been oddly inconsistent. Messages were sent, but they seemed strange, uncharacteristic of Mamdouh's usual tone. Spelling errors, abrupt language, and unusual phrasing caught the attention of both investigators and his loved ones. Something wasn't adding up. By January 2024, with no sign of Mamdouh and no evidence pointing to his whereabouts, the investigation escalated. The homicide squad took over the case, suspecting that foul play was involved. Detectives conducted a thorough forensic examination of the Noufl family home in Greenacre. What they found raised even more questions. In the garage, there were faint traces of what appeared to be blood. Further testing confirmed the presence of human blood, although it had been meticulously cleaned. Inside the house, detectives noticed something odd. The flooring in certain areas had been recently replaced. Upon closer inspection, it became clear that these renovations had been done hastily, likely to cover up evidence. Neighbors reported hearing power tools late into the night on multiple occasions around the time of Mamdouh's disappearance. At first, they dismissed it as routine home improvement, but with the new developments, these details began to paint a darker picture. One of the most significant breakthroughs came from Mamdouh's social media accounts. Although inactive for weeks, sporadic messages and posts started appearing, as if trying to convince people he was still alive. But the discrepancies were glaring. Friends and family noted that the tone and style of the messages didn't match Mamdouh's personality. Some of the posts even contained slang he never used. Digital forensics traced the activity to devices inside the Noufl home, all of which were linked to his wife, Nirmeen. This revelation added a new layer to the investigation, raising suspicions that someone was deliberately trying to mislead authorities. As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered a series of financial transactions that suggested a possible motive. In the months before his disappearance, Mamdouh had been transferring large sums of money to a woman in Egypt, whom he referred to as his fiancée. This revelation shocked friends and family, as it suggested Mamdouh had been keeping significant secrets. On the day of his disappearance, Mamdouh had granted Nirmeen power of attorney over his overseas properties. Shortly after, Nirmeen sold these assets, returning to Australia with a substantial amount of money. Investigators also learned that following his disappearance, Nirmeen contacted the woman in Egypt, demanding the return of the money Mamdouh had sent. These findings pointed to a potential financial conflict between Mamdouh and Nirmeen. The timing of the property sales, combined with her sudden access to large sums of money, raised significant red flags. The investigation reached its climax in October 2024, when police arrested 54-year-old Nirmeen Noufl at her home. She was charged with the murder of her husband, Mamdouh. According to police, Nirmeen had not only killed Mamdouh, but had also gone to extraordinary lengths to cover up the crime. The allegations were shocking. She had dismembered his body using knives and a power saw, then disposed of the remains in 20 to 30 garbage bags, which were scattered across residential and industrial bins in southwestern Sydney. Despite extensive searches, Mamdouh's remains have never been found, a fact that continues to haunt investigators and the Noufl family. The case of Mamdouh Noufl has become one of Sydney's most talked about mysteries. The shocking allegations, the financial motives, and the chilling details of the alleged crime have left an indelible mark on the community. As the legal proceedings move forward, the full story of what happened to Mamdouh remains a puzzle, one that continues to captivate the public's imagination. As investigators dug deeper into the disappearance of Mamdouh Noufl, the seemingly ordinary life of this Sydney family began to unravel, revealing a complex web of financial disputes, personal relationships, and alleged deception that would ultimately form the foundation of one of the city's most shocking criminal cases. At the center of this tangled story was Mamdouh's relationship with a woman overseas, a connection that had, according to reports, grown stronger in the months leading up to his disappearance. The prosecution later revealed that Mamdouh had been in contact with a woman in Egypt who he reportedly referred to as his fiancée. This revelation alone would have raised eyebrows, but it was the financial aspect of this relationship that became a critical focus of the investigation. Over time, Mamdouh had been transferring substantial sums of money to this woman. According to those close to the family, these transactions became a significant source of tension between Mamdouh and his wife Nirmeen. This financial dispute was not an isolated issue, but rather a symptom of deeper fractures in their relationship. On the day of his disappearance, Mamdouh signed over power of attorney to Nirmeen, granting her control of his overseas properties. It is unclear what motivated this decision, whether it was an act of trust, a concession in the face of mounting disagreements, or something else entirely. What is clear, however, is that shortly after this, Nirmeen traveled to Egypt, where she sold the properties and returned to Australia with a substantial amount of money, reportedly in the range of $200,000. The prosecution later suggested that this series of financial decisions and actions painted a picture of premeditation. They argued that Mamdouh's disappearance was not a random occurrence, but rather a calculated effort to remove him from the equation, driven by financial gain and personal grievances. However, this narrative was just one side of a deeply polarizing case. Months after Mamdouh's last sighting, his family and friends received sporadic messages from his social media accounts. These messages were peculiar. They lacked Mamdouh's usual tone, and at times, the phrasing seemed inconsistent with how he typically communicated. It was these communications that initially staved off suspicion, creating the illusion that he was alive and perhaps living abroad. But as the investigation unfolded, the prosecution alleged that these messages were not from Mamdouh at all. Instead, they claimed that Nirmeen had been using his accounts to manipulate those closest to him, ensuring that no one raised alarms or dug too deeply into his whereabouts. The alleged impersonation extended beyond messages. Investigators pointed to attempts to keep up appearances by handling Mamdouh's affairs as if he were still alive. Whether through financial transactions or social media activity, these actions were, according to the prosecution, an elaborate ruse designed to buy time and divert attention. But the case was not so straightforward. The defense presented a narrative that starkly contrasted with the prosecution's claims. At the heart of their argument was the assertion that Mamdouh and Nirmeen's marriage had been fraught with difficulties long before his disappearance. They painted a picture of a deeply troubled relationship, alleging years of domestic abuse. According to the defense, Nirmeen had endured physical and emotional trauma at the hands of Mamdouh, and these experiences had left her in a fragile mental state. Adding weight to their claims, Nirmeen's mental health history became a central point of discussion in court. Diagnosed with depressive disorder and PTSD, the defense argued that these conditions significantly influenced her actions and responses. They suggested that if Nirmeen had indeed taken any deceptive actions, they were not born out of malice or greed, but rather out of desperation, a response to years of mistreatment and emotional turmoil. In the courtroom, these opposing narratives collided. The prosecution's version of events, filled with allegations of greed, manipulation, and cold calculation, stood in stark contrast to the defense's portrayal of a woman pushed to her limits by circumstances beyond her control. Both sides pointed to key pieces of evidence to bolster their claims. One of the most harrowing details in the case came from the investigation into Mamdouh's remains, or rather, the lack thereof. The prosecution alleged that after Mamdouh was killed, his body was dismembered and disposed of in garbage bags, which were then scattered across various residential and industrial bins in Sydney. The specifics of this claim were grim, with investigators citing the use of tools like knives and a power saw. Despite exhaustive efforts, Mamdouh's remains were never recovered, adding a layer of uncertainty and tragedy to the case. Forensic evidence played a crucial role in building the prosecution's case. They presented findings that, they argued, linked Nirmeen to the alleged disposal process. However, the defense countered by questioning the reliability of this evidence, pointing to the absence of direct, irrefutable proof tying Nirmeen to the act itself. They also argued that the narrative of financial motive was overly simplistic, ignoring the complex dynamics of their marriage. The court was left with a monumental task: to sift through the layers of evidence, allegations, and personal history to uncover the truth. Was this a case of a calculated crime driven by greed and betrayal? Or was it the tragic outcome of a woman pushed to her breaking point after years of suffering? As the trial unfolded, it became clear that the case of Mamdouh Noufl was not just about one man's disappearance, but about the intersection of family, money, and the hidden struggles that can exist behind closed doors. The courtroom became a stage for two competing stories, each filled with its own version of heartbreak and complexity. For those watching, the question remained: where did the truth lie? And would justice, in whatever form it took, ever truly be served? After months of silence, Mamdouh Noufl's disappearance turned into a full-scale investigation. The NSW police, initially pursuing this as a missing person case, found themselves faced with disturbing inconsistencies. A key breakthrough came when close friends reported Mamdouh's uncharacteristic lack of contact, coupled with cryptic online activity on his social media accounts that raised red flags. As investigators delved deeper, a chilling suspicion took shape. On October 2024, the case took a dramatic turn when Mamdouh's wife, Nirmeen Noufl, was arrested and charged with his murder. The arrest unfolded in the couple's Greenacre home, the very place where investigators believed the crime had occurred. Forensic teams had uncovered damning evidence, traces of blood in the garage, and inconsistencies in Nirmeen's alibi. Authorities also alleged that Nirmeen had gone to extraordinary lengths to cover her tracks. Using Mamdouh's social media accounts, she posed as him, attempting to convince family and friends that he was alive and well. This digital impersonation became a cornerstone in the prosecution's case, painting a picture of premeditation and intent. Nirmeen, who had remained stoic during the initial investigation, showed no visible reaction during her arrest. However, the police reported that they had pieced together what they believed was a meticulously planned crime, carried out in stages. From Mamdouh's murder to the disposal of his body in multiple locations across Sydney, investigators alleged that Nirmeen had used knives and a power saw to dismember her husband, placing his remains in garbage bags that were scattered across industrial bins. Nirmeen was formally charged with murder, improper interference with the body, and fraudulent activity in impersonating Mamdouh online. Prosecutors claimed she orchestrated this act to gain financial control, citing suspicious transfers of money and property sales following Mamdouh's death. In a surprising twist, police also uncovered communications between Nirmeen and an overseas woman whom Mamdouh had reportedly been engaged to. This woman revealed that Nirmeen contacted her, demanding the return of money Mamdouh had allegedly sent. The financial entanglements provided a potential motive, bolstered by evidence that Mamdouh had granted an overseas assets on the very day he disappeared. In court, Nirmeen's legal team painted a starkly different picture. They argued that she was a victim of long-term domestic violence and mental health struggles that had spiraled out of control. Her defense presented evidence of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and a depressive disorder, conditions they claimed were exacerbated by years of emotional and physical abuse. According to the defense, Mamdouh's behavior had become increasingly erratic in the months leading up to his disappearance. They alleged that he controlled the family's finances and subjected Nirmeen to psychological torment. On the day of the alleged murder, her lawyers claimed an argument escalated into an altercation, culminating in what they argued was a tragic, unintentional death. They further contended that Nirmeen's actions to dispose of the body stemmed from fear and desperation rather than malice. The defense also criticized the lack of direct forensic evidence linking Nirmeen to the murder scene. While blood traces were found, her legal team suggested they could have resulted from unrelated events. They challenged the prosecution's timeline, arguing that key pieces of evidence were circumstantial. Nirmeen's bail hearing in November 2024 was a tense affair. The prosecution vehemently opposed bail, citing the severity of the charges and the alleged attempts to obstruct justice. The court sided with the prosecution, denying bail and ordering Nirmeen to remain in custody. In subsequent pretrial hearings, prosecutors introduced testimony from neighbors who reported suspicious activity around the time of Mamdouh's disappearance. They described seeing Nirmeen loading large garbage bags into her car late at night, a detail that prosecutors argued aligned with their timeline of the crime. The defense, however, focused on her mental health records, presenting evidence of hospitalizations and therapy sessions to bolster their narrative of a woman pushed to her breaking point. They emphasized the lack of a clear motive for premeditation, arguing that the financial disputes with Mamdouh's overseas fiancé were not enough to explain such a crime. As the case stands, Nirmeen faces a monumental legal battle. Investigators have yet to locate Mamdouh's remains, a fact that could complicate the prosecution's ability to secure a conviction. However, the circumstantial evidence and digital trail have provided a compelling narrative for the state's case. The trial is set to begin in early 2025, with both sides preparing to argue their version of events. For Nirmeen, the stakes couldn't be higher. If convicted, she faces life imprisonment, but her defense remains resolute in their efforts to prove her innocence, or, at the very least, mitigate the charges to a lesser degree of culpability. For now, the courtroom becomes the stage where the truth behind Mamdouh Noufl's tragic disappearance will be laid bare, leaving a captivated public to await the final verdict in a case that has already shocked the nation. As detectives unraveled the threads of Mamdouh Noufl's disappearance, the details that emerged painted a story that was both deeply unsettling and profoundly tragic. In their pursuit of answers, they uncovered allegations that defied belief. actions so extreme that even seasoned investigators struggled to piece them together without a sense of disbelief. Court documents outline a chilling sequence of events that allegedly took place behind the closed doors of the Noufl family home. It is believed that Mamdouh was killed during a volatile and heated confrontation, though the exact trigger for this fatal altercation remains shrouded in speculation. Investigators contend that the crime itself was not premeditated, but was followed by a calculated series of actions aimed at erasing any trace of Mamdouh's existence. The allegations suggest that after the fatal incident, Mamdouh's wife, Nirmeen, faced a grim reality. Acting alone, she is accused of carrying out a dismemberment of his body. This alleged process, as per forensic evidence, was executed using knives and a power saw, tools that investigators later noted were readily accessible in the family garage. It is believed that this act was not carried out in haste, but with deliberate care to minimize evidence and facilitate disposal. Traces of Mamdouh DNA and other biological materials were discovered in the garage, despite attempts to clean the area thoroughly. Forensic experts pointed to microscopic residues found on tools and surfaces, evidence that suggested this was the primary location of the dismemberment. These findings became a pivotal piece of the prosecution's case, forming a grim timeline of events that had previously been hidden from view. Once the dismemberment was complete, it is alleged that Nirmeen meticulously packaged Mamdouh Esquire's remains into 20 to 30 garbage bags. According to investigators, these bags were then distributed among public garbage bins located across southwestern Sydney, spanning residential neighborhoods and industrial zones. Surveillance footage, though limited, reportedly captured movements consistent with this account. Images of a person disposing of items in various locations over the course of several days. This method of disposal presented an enormous challenge for investigators. By the time they began piecing together the chain of events, the garbage in question had already been collected, processed, or discarded at landfills. Despite exhaustive searches in these areas, no physical remains of Mamdouh have ever been recovered. This lack of tangible evidence became a haunting aspect of the case, leading many unanswered questions and further complicating the path to justice. Adding to the complexity of the case was the alleged psychological and emotional detachment displayed in the weeks and months following Mamdouh's disappearance. Investigators claim that Nirmeen actively worked to create the illusion that her husband was still alive. Social media played a central role in this effort. Posts were made from Mamdouh's accounts, portraying him as a man enjoying life abroad, far removed from any turmoil. To friends and acquaintances, these updates provided a sense of reassurance. But to those closest to him, they began to raise questions. Nirmeen also reportedly reached out to Mamdouh's family and acquaintances, further solidifying the narrative of his supposed travels. Yet, cracks in the story started to emerge. Friends who tried to contact Mamdouh directly received no response. His family in Egypt, initially convinced by the idea that he was visiting them soon, grew increasingly alarmed when he failed to arrive or communicate. It was these concerns that ultimately led to the involvement of law enforcement and the beginning of an investigation that would uncover a deeply unsettling truth. The alleged motivations behind these actions form a critical part of the case. It is claimed that financial conflicts played a significant role, with Mamdouh having transferred a substantial amount of money to a woman overseas whom he referred to as his fiancée. This revelation reportedly caused tension within the household, with Nirmeen allegedly confronting him over these transactions. On the day of his disappearance, Mamdouh reportedly signed over power of attorney to Nirmeen, granting her control over his overseas properties, a move that, according to the prosecution, set the stage for what followed. After his death, Nirmeen allegedly liquidated these properties, traveling overseas to finalize the sales, and returning to Australia with a significant sum of money. She is also accused of contacting the woman who had received money from Emad, requesting that the funds be returned, an action that investigators claim was part of a broader effort to cover up the crime. Despite the calculated nature of these actions, the psychological toll of such decisions remains a point of contention. Court documents reveal that Nirmeen has a history of mental health struggles, including diagnoses of depressive disorder and PTSD. Her defense team argues that these factors, combined with alleged instances of domestic violence within the marriage, may have influenced her actions. They claim that the events leading to Mamdouh's death were not premeditated, but were instead a response to years of strain and conflict. A lack of physical remains has left an indelible mark on this case. For Mamdouh's family, the absence of closure is a wound that continues to deepen. Without a body, many questions remain unanswered. What exactly transpired in those critical moments? Were there signs that could have prevented this tragedy? And most hauntingly, could Mamdouh's remains still be recovered, providing some measure of peace to those who knew and loved him? As the trial continues, these details stand as a stark reminder of the complexities of human relationships and the devastating consequences that can arise from unaddressed conflicts. For now, the courtroom is the stage where this tragic story unfolds, and the search for truth continues. As we reach the end of this story, one haunting question remains: where are Mamdouh Noufl's remains? Despite extensive investigations, the truth of what happened after his tragic death has yet to fully surface. The unanswered details leave an unsettling void, one that deepens the mystery surrounding this case. This story is more than just a tale of a disappearance and an alleged crime. It reflects the devastating consequences of fractured relationships, hidden financial dealings, and the dangerous dynamics that can unfold within a family. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about trust, control, and the dire outcomes when communication and support systems fail. What do you think ultimately led to this tragedy? Was it a moment of desperation or something else entirely? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this case has kept you on the edge of your seat, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any of our deep dives into the world of true crime. Thank you for watching, and stay curious, stay safe.